this is the first, only Sichuan opera which had collaborated with Western theatre. And the audience loved it.
Where would you ever see that? I mean, we might see it in a museum, the V&A stacked with endless amounts of emperor's costumes and things, but actually to actually see them worn and see them be real in front of somebody on stage is a whole different experience, and I think people really love that.
Generally, sitting to watch something that I've written, I find a painful experience, and there is usually at least a 5 or 10 minute section, at the very least, that I'm wincing at. But with this, I was just caught up in watching the performance.
There isn't any point in trying to make comparisons with Western types of theatre, because while there are similarities, in truth Sichuan opera just stands completely on its own.
This project has been in my head for a long, long time, because I always want to do, something about a show which mixed match culture and the Western culture, because I lived here for a long time and I lived in China, grew up in China. So I thought if I show the people my culture and share the art with people, it would be brilliant. So a few years ago, I went back to China with my son and we went to watch lots of shows and sort of stuff. Then suddenly I came up with the idea I wanted to bring the Sichuan opera over to here. But the thing is, if I bring this whole Sichuan opera show over here, and people won't understand. They won't understand the show, they won't understand the language and the storyline, so on, so on, so on. I thought if I take part of the show over here and collaborate with Western theatre, it would make sense.
Ling and I have worked on a number of different projects together, and through our sort of developing friendship, we started talking more and more about, wouldn't it be nice to do something a little bit more ambitious? How could we challenge ourselves a bit more? And Ling had this sort of idea of the Sichuan opera, and once we'd sort of decided that we were definitely going to take this project forward, needed to bring on other collaborators really. So we sort of formed a consortium, which then we had to give a name to, so we called ourselves the Flying Panda Company.
Flying Panda is a group of 4 individuals. Ling, who is a musician and composer, who I've worked with before. Helen, a designer, who I've worked with before, and Julian, who's a director and producer, who I work with a lot.
Before the project started, I knew absolutely nothing about Sichuan opera. I didn't even sort of realise that there were different types of opera in different regions of China.
What I knew about the Sichuan opera was very little, if I'm honest.
Only the few things that Ling had told me, and I didn't really understand any of it. And to find out about Sichuan opera is really difficult. I mean, obviously, I did as much research as I could, which mainly consisted of looking for books, of which I found none, and of Googling, Sichuan opera and seeing little Wikipedia entries, and really not having any real notion of what it was.
In China, we have got 24 different provinces, and each province has got their own individual operas. And the Sichuan opera is the 3rd biggest opera in China, apart from Peking opera and Yu opera from Shanghai. But the Sichuan opera is much more visual and very much physical work. Peking opera is a lot of singing, but Sichuan opera is much, much more visual.
As a designer, you tend to have to research through books, and very often it's quite difficult, just because of time and finances, to get to the real core of the subject. And one of the big things that Ling and I decided was that we would go to China. That was always the biggest thing that we wanted to do, was to research into something, do something a bit more ambitious than what we've been doing, but actually to go there and immerse ourselves in it, to really explore it as a subject.
China was just a fantastic experience from the very beginning. It sounds an odd thing to say, but it was a lot more foreign and exotic than I thought it would be.
China was great. It was an amazing place to visit, and I think it was an amazing time to go and visit China as well, because things are changing so rapidly there. In 5 years' time, there may well be things that we got to see that won't exist anymore.
We had a great time. We watched lots of shows. We went to nightclubs. Some of them got tummy pain. We had a fantastic time.
Both cities that we went to, Chengdu and Chongqing, are incredibly vibrant cities. And although it felt like a holiday to a certain extent, there was also a real sense that we are here to work. And what was amazing about the trip to China was the fact that we were given such access to the work that Sichuan opera companies were doing. The thing that sticks in my mind actually is we went to a museum near a tea house. It was a small museum that they opened up for us. that had a lot of photos of Sichuan opera on the walls. And what was really interesting was seeing that some of the plays were plays that we knew in the West. And for me, that was quite liberating, because it was like, okay, so they're doing the Shakespeare in a Sichuan opera style. And so that actually, it gives us real, it kind of gave me a real sense of freedom. Like, okay, it doesn't matter, we'll write this script and we'll use the facets and the elements of Sichuan opera. But it doesn't matter equally if there are Western elements in it, because we can do it in the Sichuan opera style.
Having Ling at the root of it, she was able to negotiate or find the sort of people that we needed to talk to that made it the valuable trip that it was, really. We were able to visit opera troupes in 2 different cities. We met the Cultural Bureau, who introduced us to directors, schools, academies. We were able to see many performances, talk to people, see the costumes, try them on, go backstage, watch people applying the makeup and the hair and the headdresses and all of the amazing things that bring Sichuan opera together.
We found a couple of people we thought we liked, and we talked to them about coming to England with us, and they were interested. But they were very busy. They've got a very important project coming up. So the woman, she said, okay, if I can't come over, I might have 2 people you might be interested. And from there, she gave me 2 names, Liu and Jen. And it was the best we could have hoped, really.
The 2 performers that came over from China, Jian and Yui, were, I can safely say, astonishing. They were a joy to work with. They had both been involved in Sichuan opera since childhood. They were both regular practitioners, and they just had a skill and a knowledge of what they were doing.
We were very clear that we wanted specific skills from the performers. One of the many routines in Sichuan opera is face changing. It's the one that is most widely known because it's the most spectacular. It's a moment when a character literally unveils different faces through this incredible technique where their hand literally moves across their face and a mask that was there previously literally vanishes into thin air and another one appears. And we knew that they could both face change, which was a bonus. We definitely wanted one face changer. Yui was a singer, which we wanted, and Jian played a comic role, the role of Pijin, which is a very famous role in Sichuan opera.
And they were both very, very happy.
As we devised what the performance would be, we really sort of quite quickly decided that we didn't want to just include our experiences of Sichuan opera, but our experiences of being in China. So we drew up lists of all of the things that we thought were great in China and that we wanted to include in the play, even if they weren't things that you would necessarily find in Sichuan opera.
We threw everything in there, wheelbarrow, or we want, beautiful young girl, handsome young man, all sort of stuff which we liked in there.
And then we kind of made up all these stories. We kind of said, okay, we'll take 3 of these aspects, which are things that we remembered that are nothing to do with Sichuan opera, and we'll take a couple of routines and a couple of characters and a couple of storylines, and then we'll make our own story up. And from those, we then created a piece for the Children's Festival.
We did some music sessions, a little bit of drama devising, trying to look at the sort of stylistic movement of the Sichuan opera, what we'd learned, special walk or ways in which the opera performers move. And we also thought about the sort of element of mask and makeup. Something that did concern us a little bit at the beginning was how scary people might find the actual masked element, especially if we were inviting younger audiences to watch this. It's a very, very sort of severe look that we thought might have been threatening. But actually, when the young children looked at the books and saw our photographs, they thought they were marvellous, and they all sort of painted and drew their own faces, and we made little sort of masks that they wore.
And then basically I went away with all of this information, this real sense of this is what we want to tell, this is what we want in our play, and kind of put it all together.
The company comprised of Jian and Yui from China.
2 British actors, Mark Jardine and Kat Boot, who were a pleasure to work with, Matt Marks, who is a British musician, and Ling, musical director, was involved as a performer as well.
The performance that we actually came up with ended up having a structure that was this play within the play. And I think that was a really useful way of us staying true to the elements of Sichuan opera, because we didn't have to dumb anything down to explain stuff.
The story was that it was some Western travellers coming into a tea house that's about to be closed down, where Sichuan opera was being performed. These people who inhabited the tea house were packing it all up because it was going to close.
So there were Westerners who'd arrived in a tea room who then worked with the Chinese performers to put on this Sichuan opera.
My grandmother used to own a tea house, which, you know, like a hotel, and every market day, and there was hundreds of people would come to the tea house and drink tea. It's a place for them to meet up, a place for them to socialize in, really, and it's so important for the Chinese people's life. So I thought it would be really great to have this show happen in a tea house.
But it's a tea house that is about to be demolished, because we know that, you know, from our experience of being in China, that Sichuan opera is an art form that is being preserved by the government. But equally, there's a lot of kind of cultural vandalism happening, a lot of buildings being demolished. And a lot of Sichuan opera is now being performed on television, and a lot of the companies exist by doing work for television. That it would allow us to talk about what Sichuan opera is, but also the threats that are facing Sichuan opera as well.
I play the erhu, which is a two-string instrument. Some people call it Chinese violin. Because it's a string instrument, of course people give the name as violin, but this instrument is very unique, and this instrument sounds like somebody's voice. It's always a very good instrument of telling stories, really, and it's a very popular Chinese instrument which has been used a lot in Sichuan opera. It's not like the Western music, so people just do the chords and, you know, to play and on the guitar, and people just sing on the top of it. But with Sichuan opera, Chinese music, always erhu follow the singer singing with the melody. And because we have to follow the singer to sing, the erhu player have to watch the actors on the stage to follow her. I have to know how long this note is going to be, because it's not fixed. And if I'm late or too early, it wouldn't go well. So it's really hard process, but it worked really, really, really well.
One of the most magical moments was on our first day of rehearsals. Yu and Jen brought all of these costumes with them into the rehearsal room, and suddenly dressed up in the actual costume to show us what they actually looked like, and just to see the transformation of this woman that we'd met at the airport, a lovely woman, to suddenly be this opera star right up in front of us in the UK, who was about to be part of this show, was just a really magical moment. And I think then it was really, at that point, I thought, this is real, and we're actually doing this. We're creating a piece of theatre.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. 你看这个非常的重要。 And slowly, Yu told me something amazing.
Neither Jan nor Yui spoke any English, which was interesting. And it made for an interesting rehearsal process. But if anything, the block with the language actually enabled us to make the performance more interesting, because that notion of Westerners in a foreign environment, we could really bring that home, and it did really come home very clearly, almost out of necessity, out of the way that the play was structured, out of the way that it was directed, the way that the performers behaved, the communication between the characters, all of that stuff was in a sense was dictated by the very fact that two of the performers couldn't speak English.
The thing that excited me the most was hearing for the first time the script being read by the English and the Chinese performers, because obviously that sense of does it work as a dual script, a dual language script, was key. And it was just fantastic to hear it. And I felt really proud, even though I'd not written it in Mandarin, Ling had translated it, that I had written a script that was half in Mandarin. And hearing it was wonderful, actually. And just seeing the script with English on one side and Mandarin on the other was really fantastic as well.
On the first night, it was a really interesting experience, really, in terms of getting the audience reaction. It always is on any first night, but certainly with a show that we were all quite nervous about. You know, half of it's in Chinese and very, very different style of theatre. But what was amazing was that people of all ages, you know, young and old, seemed to be genuinely transfixed, and you know, people were applauding the routines, and they laughed at the difference, you know, of Jian doing these amazing sort of acrobatic, sort of funny shapes. And people were sort of behind it somehow, and you felt that from the audience.
The show was received really well in all of the venues that we were at, and the company was made to feel really welcome, especially in the rural touring venues where you do feel as if you're being almost invited into someone's home. You know, they unlock the village hall for you, and the kettle gets put on, and the sandwiches are brought out. And, you know, it's a really pleasant experience. And I know that Jan and Uwe really enjoyed that side of things, and kind of seeing all the different villages and feeling as if they were being welcomed into the community.
It was received brilliantly. I didn't see the show many times, but what was interesting, I saw it in a couple of village halls, and it was a village hall show. That's who we wrote it for. But as the show continued to tour, the dialogue between the performers on stage and the musicians was becoming more and more sophisticated, and the show was getting better and better because of that. And it could have carried on, I think, for another 20 or 30 shows.
And so that was that. The last ever Sichuan opera to be performed in the Dragon Rain Tea House on Fatty Pig Market Street, in the city of Chengdu, in the province of Sichuan, in the country called China. We hope that you enjoyed it.
I want the audience to learn more about the Chinese culture. The theatre show is about people's everyday life, is about human being, really. And of course I want them to take away with when they were excited, and when they go home they could not stop talking about it, and also the, you know, sort of the excitement, really. I want them to really think that this is a fantastic show and a great cultural experience for them.